Good day, everyone. Me and Kyla are tasked to report about Persian literature. Objectives: knowledge. Demonstrate understanding on the various characteristics of Persian literature. Skill: evaluate the selected Persian literature by doing a summary. Affective: recognize the importance of Persian literature. Introduction: Persia, historic region of southwestern Asia, associated with the area that is now modern Iran. The term Persia was used for centuries and originated from a region of southern Iran formerly known as Persis. The use of the name was gradually extended by the ancient Greeks and other people to apply to the whole Iranian plateau. The people of that region have traditionally called their country Iran, land of the Aryans. That name was officially adopted in 1935. Persians are Iran's largest ethnic group, but nearly a dozen other ethnicities represent well over a third of the 79 million population. So aside from Persians, who are the Iran's largest ethnic group, we have other ethnic groups. We have Azeris, Kurds, Arabs, Lors, and so on. The official language and script of Iran, the lingua franca of its people, is also called Persian. Moving on to Iran's constitution and parliament, created on August 5, 1906, the Persian Constitution of 1906 was the first constitution of the Sublime State of Persia, Kahar, Iran, resulting from the Persian Constitutional Revolution. It divides into 5 chapters with many articles that developed over several years. The Quran was the foundation of this constitution, while Belgian constitution served as a partial model for the document. As you can see in the screen, that picture is Rudaki, the first poet of note to compose poems in the New Persian, written in Arabic alphabet, widely regarded as the father of Persian poetry. He flourished in the 10th century, when the Samanids were at the height of their power. His reputation as a court poet and as an accomplished musician and singer has survived, although little of his poetry has been preserved. So that is Rudaki, also called as the father of Persian poetry. That is the land and resources of Iran. The people, the religion. So we have Faravahar, the depiction of human soul before birth and after death. So the Faravahar is the best known symbol from ancient Persia of winged sun disk with a seated male figure in the center. It is thought to represent Ahura Mazda, the god of Zoroastrianism, but has also been interpreted to signify the other concepts like Fravashi or guardian angel. All of these interpretations, it should be noted, are modern. No one actually knows what the Faravahar meant to the ancient Persians who created the symbol. So Faravahar is under the religion of Zoroastrianism. And that, as you can see in the picture, that is a symbol of a winged sun disk with a seated male figure in the center. And they don't actually what is the exact meaning of that symbol, but they conclude that it might be represent Ahura Mazda, which is the god of the Zoroastrianism. Background: Ancient Iran. The Iranian languages belong together with the Indo-Aryan languages of the Indian subcontinent to one of the oldest branches of the Indo-European linguistic family. So we also have Avestan language, also called Zend language, Eastern Iranian language of the Avesta, the sacred book of Zoroastrianism. And we also have the Gathas, the oldest text of that composed of 17 short hymns written in an archaic form of an old Iranian language called Avestan, named for the Avesta, the holy book of Zoroastrianism. Moving on to Persian literature, Persian literature differs from the common definition of literature in that it is not confined to lyrical compositions, to poetry or imaginative prose, because the central elements of these appear to greater or lesser degrees in all written works of the Persians. So why does it say Persian literature differs from the common definition of literature? It is because histories or medical treatises, religious texts, or philosophical commentary are considered literature in the artistic sense as much as any poem or fictional tale. Poetry was regarded as the highest form of artistic expression by the ancient and medieval Persians, and so informs any other medium. So they did not only treat the lyrical compositions, poetry, or imaginative prose as literature. They also consider the histories, the medical treatises, religious texts, or philosophical commentary as a literature. The literature of Persia is among the oldest in the world, spanning thousands of years, and has influenced the literary works of many other cultures. The greatest and most influential work is the Shahnameh, the Persian books of kings written by the poet Abul Qasim Ferdowsi. So the Persian literature is actually the jewel in the crown of Persian culture. Yet Persian literature has never received the attention it truly deserves. The literary form of New Persian is known as Farsi in Iran, where it is country's official language, and as Dari in Afghanistan, where it and Pashto are official languages. It is written with the Cyrillic alphabet by Tajiks in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Moving on to the characteristics of Persian literature. So here are the general features of Persian literature. We have preponderance of poetry, a fairly extensive prose literature, mainly of a narrative, anecdotal, and moralizing kind also flourish, but it is overshadowed by poetry in terms of quality and quantity alike. In fact, poetry is the art par excellence of Persia, and her salient cultural achievement. Despite their considerable accomplishments in painting, pottery, textile, and architecture, in no other field have the Persians succeeded in achieving the same degree of eminence. Whereas the scope of the other arts remained limited, poetry developed into a vehicle for the most refined thoughts and the deepest sentiments. Contemplative and passionate at the same time, poetry speaks the language of the Persian heart, mind, and soul, fully reflecting the Persian world view and life experience. The next one is tangential structure and organization. The literatures of Persia generally tend to be descriptive rather than dramatic, expressionistic rather than naturalistic, organic rather than architectural. This does not mean that Iranian literatures lack dramatic or well-constructed stories. The Shahnameh contains some powerful stories with considerable dramatic effect. They also have stories with commendable structural cohesion. From their renditions, it is clear that the Middle Persian historical novels, based on the lives of Mazdak and Bahram Chubin, were dramatic and well constructed. So, even though it says in here that the literatures of Persia generally tend to be descriptive rather than dramatic, that does not mean that the work or the literatures of Persia is not dramatic, because there are also other stories like these novels Mazdak and Bahram. It is well constructed and very dramatic. Many writers and poets excelled in driving a point to home effectively by the judicious use of contrast, emphasis, paradox, and irony, but most of all by a fitting illustration, which is frequently used in Persian didactic literature to dramatize an abstract point. So we have decorative tendency. A third feature of Persian literature is its taste for the use of rhetorical devices and ornament. It has often been observed that Persian art has a marked decorative tendency. This is clearly seen in the visual arts, architecture, book illustration, wall painting, book binding, calligraphy, and textiles, as well as in music. In modern Persian criticism, this tendency, an integral part of artistic expression in Persian letters, has been somewhat deprecated, partly as a result of changes in literary values and partly because the critics have usually focused on excessive examples. In early Persian poetry, ornament is minimal, partly as a result of the poetry's youth and partly because it was modeled on Sasanian poetry. In pre-Islamic Persia, poetry and music went hand in hand, and the minstrels usually sang their poems with the accompaniment of instruments. And lastly, we have conventionality. A fourth feature of Persian literary tradition is the conventionality of its themes and imagery. The major themes and forms of Persian poetry were set in the first century of its appearance. They are seen as early as the works of Rudaki. Furthermore, the different genres of Persian poetry generally correspond to specific forms. The qasida or ode, a long monorhyme for panegyrics. The ghazal, a shorter monorhyme of about 7 to 14 lines. The matnavi or couplet for narrative themes, the ruba or quatrain for epigrammatic poems, and the kita, piece or fragment for casual themes. These forms and their corresponding genres have remained fairly constant for nearly 1,000 years. The next topic, which is Persian prose and poetry, will be discussed by Kyla.